LA Times The Envelope Roundtable is brought to you by the Apple TV Plus limited series, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, for your Emmy consideration in all eligible categories.
From the Los Angeles Times, this is the Envelope Drama Roundtable. Joining us today, Kaitlyn Dever is Betsy in Hulu's Dopesick, about the roots of the American opioid epidemic.
That company's been lying to everybody.
Jin Ha is Solomon in Apple TV Plus's Pachinko, a lush, sweeping epic telling the multi-generational story of a Korean family.
At least you only had 2 countries to get through. I'd be lucky if Korea made the top 4.
Melanie Lynskey is Shauna in Showtime's Yellowjackets, a mix of coming-of-age drama and horror about a plane crash and its aftermath.
I can't believe you thought I was going to book club this whole time.
Adam Scott is Mark in Apple TV Plus's darkly comedic Severance. In it, office workers undergo the ultimate non-disclosure agreement, brain surgery to permanently separate their work and home lives.
Thank you. May I have a handshake?
Ray Seehorn is Kim in the final season of AMC's Better Call Saul. As the show gets closer to linking up with its predecessor Breaking Bad, will viewers finally learn what happens to the tough, beloved lawyer?
You think we're wicked?
Sebastian Stan delivers a transformative performance as rocker Tommy Lee in Hulu's limited series Pam and Tommy.
I see you!
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for The Envelope. Here we are in the Los Angeles Times kitchen. I'm Michael Ordoña. I cover film, television, and pop culture for the LA Times. And today I am joined by the stars of 6 of the most talked about shows this television season. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
There's just so much to ask about your shows. There's no way we can fit into an hour, but we're going to try. And I'm told in situations such as this, that it's good to start with something that kind of breaks the ice. I wanted to ask you something in honor of Adam's show, Severance, in which people get this procedure so that they can't remember anything that they did at work. Their work lives and their home lives are completely separate. So I wonder if you guys have in your resumes any show, any movie, play, high school play that you wish you could forget. Adam, I thought I'd start with you. Is there something on there?
Oh, man.
Yeah, which director you want to throw under the bus right now?
I mean,
Wish you could forget.
yeah. When I started, I came here and I didn't know anyone, and so I just started doing like background work and anything I could do to try and get an agent or a man. I just didn't know anyone, and so I just started kind of going for it. And my first job ever was I was in the background for a Tia Carrere music video. Do you remember Tia Carrere?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, and it was in the fall of like 1993, and it was at a coffee house, and I had a beret, and I was sitting drinking coffee in the background. Yes, and I took it really seriously and was incredibly excited. And I actually can't find it on YouTube, so I guess the world has forgotten about it. But it was so vivid and such a big deal to be on a real set and with a real movie star lip syncing in the foreground. But yeah, I mean, as far as wanting to forget stuff, I don't know. I mean, even the stuff that's a little shaky and maybe I wasn't terrific in, or maybe the whole thing doesn't quite work, I kind of feel like it all counts and it all sort of builds up to whatever it is you're doing now. And I'm sure I have many more things in the future that won't work particularly well, but it's all about kind of taking a swing.
Kaitlyn, I thought you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I feel the same way you guys do. I feel like all of it is a stepping stone to the next thing. I mean, I definitely started out doing commercials, and I was like 11 when I first started out. So there are definitely things that I have learned since then. Adam, I think what does come to mind, because we were just talking about it, but I did an episode of Party Down with Adam.
How old were you? How old were
I
you?
think I was.
I loved that show.
I was probably 14, and I played a girl named Escapade.
Yeah.
I played
Stop.
Megan Mullally's daughter, and I recently saw like a clip of it, and I'm like, oh my god! I sang the Star Spangled Banner in front of the entire cast of Party Down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which was a big moment, but also I look back on that and I go, oh wow, that was a lot.
Well, I'll tell you that then we all were talking about like, wow, this kid is so good. And when like Booksmart came out and things really started like exploding for you, it was absolutely no surprise because I remember we were all really impressed because that took guts too, like to sing in front of it was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you from that episode.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah,
Oh my
I
God.
was obsessed with that show. Obsessed. Yeah. I feel like I've already told you that
very
1,000 times
nice.
before. But I remember you're always amazing,
So
no
good.
matter what.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Doesn't sound like something worth forgetting. Okay.
I feel like they're all. I totally agree with everybody. They're all learning experiences. I think I would feel. There's some performances where I wasn't good enough for what was being asked of me yet. When you're early on in your career, that you wish you could do them again or whatever.
Yeah.
But I would be mortified if any of my stories were. So then I phoned it in. Like I as long as I was trying my best, I learned something each time. I mean. There's probably audiences that wish they could forget some of my jobs, but I'm fine with remembering.
Yeah, I feel like early on it was more a case of maybe going for it a little too hard for,
Yes,
for me.
I would say they're.
You know?
I
would agree with that.
I think.
I have any auditions I'd like to forget.
Yeah.
Sometimes I used to just kind of go in there just going like, it doesn't matter if you get the job or not, as long as they just remember you. That's not always a good thing. And living in New York, I would always sort of make these tapes like and with an actual camcorder and then my manager would mail the VHS tapes to Los Angeles and on those tapes like we would put music and then
Wow.
you know like just try to like film the movie just whatever we could just get them to respond.
Your vision.
Yeah, because you're like it's just no one's gonna see it. You know, it's like 1 out of 1,000 tapes or whatever that gets sent. So, but I still feel like I always remember that Philip Seymour Hoffman thing, you know, when he was like, everything's a chance. You know, everything's a moment you're lucky to have to kind of keep getting better or, you know, trying something new. So
Yeah, I think that
no
sounds like
regrets.
fantastic advice that he gave. That even an audition is a chance to practice your craft, right?
Yeah.
You have to, yeah.
Auditions, I would forget every audition if I could. I did the same because I lived in New Zealand and then I lived in London and I would make those tapes too. And one time my manager called me into her office. It was my birthday and I thought I was going to pick up a script. And she had like this big screen and she was playing all my audition tapes on the screen like as a celebration. And I just was like, oh my God. It was like a literal nightmare.
When I found out that this was going to be the panel, after I said, all right, I said, so what like unites these shows or these performances? And I don't know that there's anything that does. But something that came up a lot was that these characters many of them have very strong internal conflicts, that they're doing things that they believe are wrong.
I think there is something that actually unifies all of these shows.
Which is?
I think it's about, I mean, ultimately it's humanity, right? But like the endurance. I think every single show here has to do with people being dragged through sort of unbelievably challenging circumstances and obstacles, and then hopefully the story of how does one come out from the other side of that. I've been thrust into this position of responsibility as the second generation of this family, or the third generation of this family that's gone through so much, and how do we, you know, what are the expectations that are put upon that generation, the first generation that maybe has opportunity available to them. The weight of that expectation can be heavy. We may wear it well. We may, oh my God, what was the line from Evan Hansen?
Oh.
We wear it, the invisible one, we wear it well, but it doesn't mean it's not heavy.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's beautiful, beautiful line. But it's about those internal struggles for Solomon of, I am Korean, and I was born and raised in Japan, therefore I am also Japanese, and also I went to school and worked in America, so I am also American in that way. And the way that he tries to straddle those three identities is I feel like a lot of the source of his tension.
So whenever I met anyone, men mostly, they wanted to play the guessing game. Which Asian am I?
A classic. It's always Chinese first.
Thankfully, Japanese usually comes in second.
At least you only had 2 countries to get through.
And then on top of that, it's the struggle of like, I want to be the uber capitalist and make as much money as I can as a financier in the 80s in finance. And how do I honor and listen to the voices of my past as well, of the people that came before me?
When I think about this internal conflict, I think first of Kim in Better Call Saul, because they clearly have thought about everything from the first shot to the last season. And Kim's development, are those arcs as well mapped out as they seem?
Vince Gilligan starting as showrunner of Breaking Bad, and then Peter Gould came on as one of the head writers and created the character of Saul Goodman. And then they co-show ran Better Call Saul until Vince stepped away from that role. He still writes and directs on the show, but Peter is our showrunner. And they and all of the head writers have spoken publicly about the fact, and this makes a lot of people sweat, that they don't plan it. There is an architecture to being a prequel. We have some mileposts that have to be hit. There, these 2 people can't meet earlier if they hadn't met in Breaking Bad, kind of thing. Right. But no, they're not mapped out. They said they love to paint themselves into corners and figure out how to get out.
That is crazy.
That's insane.
They don't turn in Bibles of the whole arcs of the shows, not the characters, not the stories. They like to watch. They like to plant lots of seeds and see what's growing and what's blooming. And they're insistent that character should dictate plot, not the other way around. Which is a joy to be around. It really is. And you get your scripts one at a time, and you don't know what curve is coming. It's never manipulative. It's never like they let you do a scene and you have questions where you're like, am I lying here? And they're like, I don't know. And they run away. Like, it's not like that. But I remember when they first decided that Chuck, played by the brilliant Michael McKean, was going to be this formidable foe. He originally was going to be this sad sack device to show the soft side of Jimmy, because they were going to have Jimmy become Saul Goodman by the end of the first season. And so they wanted to counter that dark side by saying there is another side, and it's this guy that takes care of his ailing brother, and he's this sweetness. And Michael McKean just has this gravitas and this way that he decided to approach the role that, and we're watching it, and they're watching it, and then slowly my character started to have lines where I am uncertain that it would just say stuff like when Jimmy's like, Chuck and I are finally going to work on something together. And it was written, and it was Gordon Smith's episode, that Kim pauses. And then all of my lines were really sort of simple questions to stall being happy for him. It was like, well, I don't have the printer code. I can't help you with that. Or I'm not sure. Isn't he too sick to do this? And then finally, there's a long pause that's written in, and then it says, I just say like, okay, and I hang up, and I ask them, what's going on there? Like, I used to want him to be closer with his brother and all that, and they said, I think she just has a weird feeling, and it was because they just had a weird feeling.
That's so fascinating. Like, how does that affect? I'm so curious how that affects like your process in terms of like just prepping for your.
Yeah, exactly.
You had to trust. Yeah, because normally we would look at, all of us, like you often are looking at what's the Z I have to get to, because it makes make A the most interesting place as a starting point to have that. And this is winding, but like I said, if it ever felt manipulative, I think it would be a very different story, like withholding information about your character, because I know you guys have all had directors that think like, I'm not even going to tell you your lines.
Oh my gosh.
That's not how it works. Everybody listening, understand that's how it works. It is the most fresh when you give it to me for the longest amount of time, the lines. But it's not like that. But you do get to do something that you really get to lean into that part of us that knows that just being present and playing the scene in front of us is the best way forward. So you have to just play that. Just play that you have a weird feeling, not that you're up to something.
You ever feel like you're being followed? When I dropped Wendy off at the motel, she thought she was being watched by some undercover cops, but then when I drove away, that same car was behind me. Right after I spotted them, they disappeared.
That was cool. That's a long-winded way to say that no, they are not plotted. And my character, obviously, being one of the only ones that you don't know the end game at all, because I'm not in Breaking Bad.
But Melanie, actually, this made me think of you in Yellowjackets, because I wonder how far ahead they've told you. I mean,
Yeah, do you get told the whole arc and where your character's going? I just read some interview with you where you wanted to know certain things.
I want to know everything.
Yeah.
I want to know everything.
That they know.
That they know.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I just, before I signed on to it, I have real commitment phobia with series. And it had been a long time since I had agreed to do a series that I knew was going to be longer than that wasn't a limited series.
Mm-hmm.
So I just asked a lot of questions about, like, what's happening at the end of season 1? What's the arc of the character? What's the arc of the general story? Like, when do they get rescued? What happens after they get rescued? Like, I just wanted to know. And for 5 seasons, they have a general idea of what they want to do, which was very comforting to me. Wow. I think I made it sound at one point like I had all the plot, because people are always like, and then what happened? And I don't know. But I do know that they have an idea, and that's all I needed. I just needed to know, and they told me the entire arc of my character for season 1, and all of that happened in the way they said.
What do you mean you killed someone? Like you murdered someone?
I stabbed him, and now he's dead. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Who?
The guy I thought was blackmailing us.
I like to know where something's going. I like to know, there were a few moments in Yellowjackets where I wanted to kind of like fall apart a little bit, but I knew there was a moment like right at the end where she was able to sort of fall apart. So I was like, I want there to be like this, I want it to happen once when she's alone. And I didn't know specifically how it was going to be written, but I sort of knew the general sort of like feeling of the season. And so I was able to just kind of like keep her sort of like pushing it down until she couldn't.
Yeah.
And I also like love improvising. That would be hard for me too. I don't want to not get hired by people who want to do it like by the book, but I improvise so much on Yellowjackets.
Do you?
There's a whole scene, there's one episode where I do this whole speech about like what Shauna was thinking would happen during college and in her life, and I improvised the whole thing. It's just like something that happened to me in college when I had an affair with this like boy. Yeah.
Thought I would meet like a floppy-haired, sad-eyed poet boy who ran the school lit magazine. He was gonna be like so smart. And they like were like great.
Too.
Yeah, but I did a whole show that was improvised.
Oh, I guess.
Which one?
Togetherness.
That was all improvised?
Well, they have scripts, and the scripts were
that
like
show.
perfect, but then they're like bored of the scripts by the time it gets to the actors, so they don't want
So
to
do you do it like
do
once
classes.
and then just improv?
On Togetherness,
yeah.
they didn't. We had to like Amanda and I had to like fight to do one that was like scripted.
Yeah.
We had to be like, please let us just try it.
Yeah, it was really good.
So
I loved that show.
Did you ever study improv ever, or no? It just comes naturally to you.
When I was in high school, because I never studied acting at all, but when I was in high school and when I was younger, there was like a local theater teacher who would host these classes on Friday nights, and she would just have kids like do dramatic improv in front of her, and she'd be like, "That was great. That wasn't so good. I didn't believe that." And it was like this crazy thing we did every Friday night from like 7 years old to the end of high school. I did it every.
Why do acting teachers all just fall into that like stereotype? Because it always reminds you of like, you guys ever see that YouTube video of Stella Adler on YouTube?
Yes.
Where she grabs her hair.
No.
Like she's got a glass of wine, first of all.
Of course.
Okay. And then like they just do this thing, she grabs her hair and she's like, it's it's not about the money. It's not about the fame.
What?
It's about acting. It's like she's so dramatic with it, and she's like, it's suffering, you know. It's like that's the life of the act, and she's so. It's just you have to watch. I feel like also when you're younger, because I remember I went to a conservatory program. We were talking about acting schools and stuff, and I loved it. But I was at 20, like 19, 20, I was so obsessed with trying to get it right, and they're teaching you a method of sorts, and this was the Meisner thing, and I stuff didn't click in for me until like 10 years later, anyway.
Right?
Because it's not. I think it's you're just too young to kind of. You just want to get it. You want to please that person.
Yeah, that's right.
It gets really tricky if you put all your eggs in one person's basket.
The book on the method that just came out about the history of the method and all the different techniques.
Well,
that
a few
fall under
people
that.
out there have ruined it for all of us on the method.
But well, he actually talks about like
boxes
what's being labeled as the method now is like one little branch that is not at all what I mean. Like anybody that's doing script analysis and even deciding to do objective and tactics and obstacles is a type of method from the Stanislavski. But they specifically talk about in the very, very beginning, one of the mandates was if you are trying to get it right, or you have a teacher that's telling you that you have to get it right, you've missed the whole point.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Like, there's everything you read on the method on the internet right now is completely wrong. Like, it's just become this ominous thing because
and an
it can
excuse
feel
for
very
bad
self-serving
behavior
for certain people. But I think at the end of the day, it's really what you make it your own. Like, there's never been a textbook per se of how to do anything. I feel like it's just you have to just kind of try things out and just see like what works for you or not, you know. And but as long as you're curious enough to kind of go out there, and I guess that was the only thing that I loved about. You know, I have a soft spot for the Stella Adler videos and stuff, only because it just reminds you that you've been this has been going on for a while. There used to be something really noble about it. You know, you were part of history. Like, that was when I went to acting school. They were like, "Do you understand? Like, people have gone on this thing, and that I feel like gets lost a little bit now, and that's the only thing that kind of, when I look back at the older books and those teachers, it just makes you feel like, oh, you know, there was something here that should be preserved."
Stay tuned for more.
And what your name is again?
Robin.
First bird of spring.
Yes.
You took care of me when nobody else could. My nephew was killed. I'm gonna find who did it.
Mr. Gray will remember everything. I can see it all so clear now.
Papa Gray, I'm worried about you.
I got to finish this.
Welcome back. This is the Envelope Drama Roundtable. On Dopesick, your addiction drives you and it makes you do things that you know are wrong, things that you don't want to do. So, can you talk about getting to that place?
Yeah, I mean, taking on that type of role, I immediately felt like such a big responsibility. And I just absolutely had to do everything right for her, and this story felt so much bigger than me. It is so much bigger than me, and I really, really felt that going into it. But there is no like set formula on how to take on something like that. There was a lot of research that went into it. I just, you know, the book that Beth Macy wrote, Dopesick, was super informative and helpful for me. And then like it was the hardest part, I think, understanding was like how it affects someone emotionally. Like there's so much you can read on Google. It's more of just like the side effects, and it's just usually just these like lists that I kept running into. It's the same thing, but I actually ended up meeting someone on set that shared a similar experience to my character, and he was so important to my process and developing the character.
I guess I always felt kind of tense. And uncomfortable around people. But taking the pills, it was the first time I felt normal.
But yeah, there's so much internalized. There's so much that she goes through. One of the bigger things too is like keeping track of the level of withdrawals that she goes throughout the story. And because we're shooting like TV, we were going so out of order. Some days I was doing episode 7, and then the next day I was doing episode 2.
Oh, wow. I think that would be so hard.
Yeah, it was really, really tough. And I didn't know how I was going to do. So I actually created a spreadsheet, a Google Docs. I don't actually know how to work
chart
Google.
to say like.
I don't know how to work it.
At?
I don't know how to work Google Docs, but my sister helped me. Awesome. So I would keep every time I would do a scene, I would like write in the little box of like, it's just so I could keep track of where she was emotionally.
Wow.
Because it's so up and down her journey. It was really, really one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But at the end of the day, like everybody that was a part of that show, like felt like we were all working towards one goal, and everybody had so much passion for it. And even like we would have like crew members coming up to me, sharing their personal stories with addiction, and it just makes me feel like so lucky to be able to be a part of something like that.
It was an incredible performance.
Thank you.
Unbelievable.
Thank you very much.
Adam, we just haven't talked about Severance, which is the show that some people are watching.
So good.
Everybody's going to tell us about season 2. I thought of this because I was in the internal conflicts, and yours are maybe the most intense of anybody here because you got them from two ends. You've got the outie who is like fighting his own trauma. He doesn't even want to deal with his own trauma, and he certainly doesn't want to reconnect.
Yeah.
And then you've got the innie who, and this is the thing, the innie, he's essentially a naif. I mean, he's like 2 years old, and he's completely indoctrinated into Lumen, which to me is like, it's a cross between a religious organization, a cult. You have trouble keeping your head straight about that?
You know, it's funny because before we started, Ben Stiller told me that he was like, because I was thinking about like it's the same character, but it's two different arcs, and we were shooting it all at once, so we had to jump. We had all 9 scripts, and we were doing the same thing where it would be like episode 1, and then later in the day episode 7. Right. Going all over the place.
Wow.
And so I was trying to figure out how I would keep track, and Ben told me, he's like, I visited Michael Keaton on the set of Multiplicity back in the day. And he said he had in his trailer, he had these charts up on the wall because he was playing a bunch of different characters for that movie, and he had a different chart for each character, so he knew exactly where they were. So it sounds like similar to what you did.
He never told me that. That's so cool.
That's right.
Yeah, because he was in that with you.
Wow.
He didn't ask you about your Google Doc?
We didn't chat about it.
And I didn't do that because I was like, it was the pandemic in New York. I was like, do I go get poster board? Right. How am I gonna do this? But what I did do is just try and map out on like whatever the opposite page of my script it was for the day, like where I would be, and just tried to plan it out to a certain extent, like the 2 arcs and where they are throughout the season, and how they affect each other, how what's happening inside affects him on the outside, just kind of physiologically, not literally, because they're not sharing memories, but there are physiological things that go on that sort of absorb into each.
I broke protocol this morning. I was dusting the old group photos, the ones with PD, and it just made me feel sad. And I guess worried that I won't be able to run MDR like he did.
So it was just sort of constantly keeping track of that, but also putting all of my sort of trust and perspective into Ben because I had to, because I wasn't going to be able to keep track of it all. So I really leaned on him throughout.
Sebastian, Pam, and Tommy. I don't know if you guys have seen.
Yes. So good.
I'm not all the way through, but I started it. It's really good.
I freaking flipped for this show. We spoke before about this, and especially the second episode. Where you guys, you've seen it, where they just lose their minds for each other. They're completely out there for each other.
Our own fortress of solitude. Over there, that'll be like a Zen garden, and there, a waterfall flowing into a koi pond, just super chill.
So Buddhist.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, you know what would be awesome? How about a meditation gazebo?
Snap! I think a lot of that for me was just trusting Craig Gillespie because I'd worked with him before. I feel like, we were talking a lot about different directors and like switching it and stuff, and it's hard because you get used to working with someone a certain way, and I think trust is always the big thing. And then it's not like you're not trusting somebody, but then it takes always a little moment to kind of like get to know how they work or how they want things. Some are more demanding than others or more specific. We were talking about Karin Kusama before, who's one of my favorite directors I've ever worked with, who was just so firm with what she wanted. And I sort of love when someone just tells me, like, just tell me what you, like, I'm not, if you leave me to my own devices, it's gonna be like a problem, because you just try to, then you start overthinking it. Right. But I think a lot of that was him having he'd already picked all his shots and how he was gonna shoot it and tell that, and so much of it was in cameras being attached to us and him trailing us and music and things, and I, as I've gotten older and worked a little bit more, I've started to become not very good at watching myself, but much better at like actually paying attention to the monitor and kind of what's going on, because then I find that it can help lift you. You don't have to do all the work sometimes, if you just understand how they're doing it.
Do you mean in terms of like what the framing will be?
The frame, the shot, like, is it, what's it like? I love watching the stand-in that you have, or the rehearsal, the camera rehearsal, because then you start to go like, oh, like when they get to that angle, like that'll be a perfect moment to turn into the thing, and it's weirdly technical. Yeah. My point is, you can be free as possible as long as you know the structure you're in. You're not like just really doing ecstasy and going into, I actually have never done ecstasy, and I have a friend who was like, well, you should do it because he's doing it. And I was like, that's not happening.
Okay, Jin, you're fluent in English and Korean, yeah?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay, in his show.
Do you look like you're worried you're going to be tested?
I haven't reviewed my vocabulary.
Mostly.
Yeah, mostly.
He speaks English?
My English is okay.
He speaks Korean with a Japanese accent?
That's correct.
Wow. And he speaks two dialects of Japanese?
Yes.
A language you don't speak?
That's correct.
Okay.
Wow.
So
That's crazy.
I've heard you give this explanation before, but could you tell them about some of that like ping-ponging you had?
Yeah, absolutely. It felt like I was working on a thesis, a dissertation for like 7 months, but essentially it was, I was working really heavily with my dialect coach, Yumi Kang, who is Zainichi Korean, so she is ethnically Korean, born and raised in Japan. I think second generation, and she also happened to be an actor as well. And so I was so lucky to have that production found her and that we were connected because I was able to work on all the languages with her because I used her Japanese accented Korean. She had been living in Korea for about 12 years, I think. I used her Japanese accented Korean as the sort of the skeleton for Solomon's because I have a bit of an American accent when I speak Korean, and so I wanted to hide that because, for people who speak Korean, because there's so many huge Korean actors in our show, I was like, I think it will be, and it has been incredibly popular in Korea.
미세 뭐 발라고 말했어요. 도어상가 이렇게 잘 되는데 미세도 가만히 보고시 하셔야지.
말 안 하더나.
왜요?
네가 아버지 요점 낸다 하더라.
And so I wanted to honor that as much as it's in a very similar way. It felt so, what you were saying resonated with me because it did feel like, oh, this is a story, and these are characters that are inspired by directly real people and real communities and histories and strife and trauma. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I was like, because I'm not Zainichi, although I'm Korean American immigrant, because I'm not Zainichi and I haven't experienced the specifics of this family, I felt even more of a responsibility to try to get it right. And for me, that was the linguistic element of it, because language is such a huge part of his identity and his also code switching. Do you know what I mean? Like, literally, I'm speaking Korean at home, but then also a little bit of Osaka dialect Japanese, because that's where a lot of ethnic Koreans were sort of relegated to and grew up. But then also I had studied and worked in Tokyo, so there's the sort of the standard Tokyo dialect of Japanese as well. And you know, you could liken it to New England and Texas, perhaps. You know, like it's that amount of difference. A lot of it was in the musicality, which I'm just grateful that I have a somewhat of a musical ear that I can. You know, we created the shorthand of figuring out what are the phonetic sounds that I have to memorize, but then on top of that, it's like, what are the definitions of each words? I think grammatically, Korean and Japanese are more similar, so I had that sort of advantage with understanding the syntax. But I mean, I don't know. It was such, and then it was like the music of like, which word within the sentence do I emphasize? What's the natural cadence that we would have in speaking English fluently that I'm trying to capture and translate to Japanese? So what Yumi and I would do is we would do text analysis and break down a scene every time. Once we got the technical language elements, we would then start talking about what's the subtext? What does Solomon want in this moment, and what is his obstacle? What is he not saying? What would he like to say? And then I would ask, how would you do that? You know what I'm saying? I was like, how would you just give me like a couple of takes that you would try to, you know, say it in that way? And then she would, and I'd be like, okay, cool, I like those options. Let's try to like, okay, so this word I'll go up, and the middle of this word I'll drop down, because it was that detail-oriented. But for me, it was, I mean, I'm getting excited just talking about it, because I think it's really fun, terrifying, and challenging. But for me, I was like, in spite of the responsibility that I felt to get it as best as I could, it was, I never felt a lack of motivation. You know, I never felt a day where I was like, I don't want to do this. Because for me, I was like, every moment I have to try to practice this, I want to. And they announced that season 2 is coming out yesterday, and so now I'm like, I have to start learning Japanese now. Yesterday.
By the way, he's going to be in China for that one, so you got to learn some.
I actually speak Mandarin. Mandarin was the only language I studied. I studied Mandarin in school, but I was like, Japanese was the one East Asian language I didn't get under my belt, and I was like, come on.
Did you try to sort of like learn Japanese at the same time, or was it just so much pressure that it's just easier to just phonetically learn the lines?
It was the latter. I hope to have now, because I believe we're going to have several months at least, I think, before we start production. And now I'm going to try to start learning some fundamentals, because you're right, there just wasn't time. I think I got cast. It was a really long audition process. But then I got cast, and I had to go to Korea pretty soon after that. So
and just start shooting,
basically. Wow.
Oh my God, I would have freaked out.
So just on the fly, you're just trying to learn.
But then also, because, you know, there were script changes too, you know, as they normally would, but they happened to be in languages I don't speak.
Good Lord.
And then also in terms of like the acting of it, it's...
well, that's just it. Even when you're not doing another language, even when you're doing an accent, the pitfall is always when the accent starts taking more precedence than the acting.
Because we have to throw it away. It's like, know it so well that I can forget it.
Well, I mean, like, how long have you been doing your perfect American accent?
Yes,
truly.
Thank you. That's very kind.
By the way, I thought she was American until I ran into him in the bathroom at Critics' Choice Awards.
I like accosted you in the bathroom and told you I was obsessed with you. I was like, I love you so much.
But I literally thought you were American up until
I think
that
most
point.
people do that watch your American.
You're so good at that accent.
So most people think you're pretentiously putting on a Kiwi accent.
People do think that.
Yeah.
Wow. Think that all the time,
How long have you been doing it, the American accent?
Well,
Did this improv teacher make you do it?
Yes. No, she didn't.
Oh, okay.
I did one weird improv thing that was like in an Irish accent once. I wonder what, that might be the thing I would forget if I could forget something. I started working when I was 15, but it was a movie in New Zealand. But then a few years after that, I started having to send tapes.
Was that Heavenly
America.
Creatures?
It was Heavenly
Yeah.
Creatures.
Which is
that little
Great
one of the best
movie.
movies ever, and your performance
That's
in
very
it.
sweet. I'm not very good with compliments. But
I'm gonna write them on pieces of paper.
okay, slide them under the table. I'll be like,
And you were 15 when you did
I was
Heavenly
15 when I
Creatures.
did.
Wow.
Insane.
Peter
At the
Jackson,
end of the
Kate
shoot, I turned
Winslet, no
16.
Yeah.
And no
I
acting,
had balloons
no
in
acting
my
training.
trailer. I was very excited.
Wow.
Well, I had done, my whole audition for Heavenly Creatures was improvised. They didn't want to show anyone the script.
Oh.
So again, thank you, Dawn Arthur, New Plymouth's one and only acting teacher, for exactly. My improvised, they just said, like, pretend you're this type of person and this is happening. And we just,
nice.
did some dramatic improv.
I know it's so random, but also your voiceover work in Heavenly Creatures is like phenomenal to me. Because I think voiceover is like so hard to try to make it sound like I'm imagining like, you're in the booth with a mic and maybe a screen, but it's just like how on earth to make that sound natural and like it's extemporaneous thought is.
You're right.
It is
hard because it's so easy to. It's even easy to trick yourself and think you're doing a great job, and then you hear it later and you're like,
but it's like, is
Jesus.
this audible? Yeah, you're like, I'm not trying to do a book here.
I feel like I fall into a thing where I'm playing mood instead of
Yes.
any kind of intention of like,
And
here's
it's
my
way too
moody
much.
narrative.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing when I have to play halves of phone calls. Like,
Oh, no,
I
I
sign up a
hate
phone
it.
call.
I hate
I'm like,
it.
this is how people talk on the
I
phone, right?
know.
And I get so
hate it.
I just did a job. I did this limited series called Candy, and
Yes.
every
Oh,
single.
I can't wait to see that.
I think it's good. I just like watched it like this once all the way through. The only time I'll ever see it, and I was like, I think it's good. Okay, done. But the director had people come in to do the other side of the phone call every time someone had a
Yes,
phone
he
call.
did that on Saul, and then once they rigged the
good.
phone up to actually be Bob on a
That's
phone
nice.
call,
That
which
happened
was
to me once. You get to stay at home.
Yeah,
did that with us on.
yes, I was home doing the phone. It was,
Yeah.
it was
I
cool, but it
still
was
find
also
it
great
hard.
to have it directionally
Yeah.
coming out of
Yes.
that phone.
It's almost as hard as like pretend waking up.
The worst.
I am great at pretend waking up. It's one of my
the
only
worst.
fortes.
Like, is it like out of a nightmare, or is it just like a subtle remembrance of what you did
Oh, it's
last
the
night?
worst.
My
Oh,
that actually
friend and
makes
I-
me laugh so
This
much.
incredible actress Denise Goff.
Oh, she's so good.
She's incredible, and she would play this game all the time on set.
Did you say Denise Goff?
Yeah.
Oh, people, places, things.
Yes. And she's
Just
like brilliant. She's like, oh, I love waking up. She's like, she sees it like this challenge because it's like, and I'm like, and then she'll go through, she went through like various different ones, like the hangover one or like
Get
the
out.
nightmare or the slow one or the just the pop up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't believe there's all these different
Yeah.
kinds,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
Because you're not sleeping. You're just sitting there going like, oh God.
Yeah.
You're so not asleep.
Right.
I remember once on an indie, I was like, you know what? I'm going to experiment, and when I wake up, I'm just going to be awake and then
my
just get up, just to
my
see if
God.
it works. And so I did it, and it was terrible. But it was this. We were in a rush, and we didn't have time for another take. So that's in the movie.
That's the one you
so
want.
bad.
Yeah.
See this now.
Yeah, which movie is that?
Friends with Kids, where I just
Oh,
wake
that's a
up
great
and like
movie.
walk out of bed.
It didn't work. That scene ruined that movie for me.
Yeah, exactly. See, I knew it.
Guys, I gotta tell you, you have been a fantastic panel, and I had a few questions that
Wow.
we didn't get to. But no, what I mean is, you guys were such a great panel. I didn't get to the questions.
Thank you, Michael.
So
Yeah.
thank you
Thanks,
so
Michael.
much for being here. For more great award season conversations, look for the Los Angeles Times envelope. I'm Michael Ordoña. Thanks for tuning in.
LA Times The Envelope Roundtable is brought to you by the Apple TV Plus limited series, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, for your Emmy consideration in all eligible categories.